September 1886. The Arizona Territory stretched wild and merciless under a blood-red dawn. Ezra McKinnon woke to cold steel pressed against his throat. 58 years old. 15 years of solitude. Former Union cavalry. Now a man who asked nothing from the world except to be left alone with his cattle and his ghosts. But the world had found him anyway. 3 Apache women stood over his bed. Warriors, not maidens. Their buckskin clothes torn from hard travel. Rifles in calloused hands. Dark eyes holding secrets he couldn't read. The eldest, maybe 26, had blood seeping through her shirt. Fresh wound. Dangerous wound. They'd bound his wrists with leather cord while he slept. Professional work. These weren't desperate girls making foolish choices. These were survivors who'd learned that mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. The one with the wound spoke first. Her English carried the weight of a dying people. You will help us, or you will die here. Had Ezra McKinnon finally met his match in the high desert? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of the American West. Ezra didn't beg. Men like him had stopped begging at Antietam. He studied the woman's face instead. High cheekbones, sharp enough to cut glass. Sweat beading despite the morning cold. That wound was worse than she wanted her companions to know. You're bleeding out, he said quietly. Another hour, maybe 2. The youngest one, barely 20, with medicine bundles hanging from her belt, stepped forward. Her eyes widened as she saw what Ezra saw. The dark stain spreading beneath her leader's arm wasn't sweat. Ayanna, she whispered. The wounded woman, Ayanna, swayed slightly, but kept the rifle steady. I'm fine, Nayeli. She wasn't fine. Ezra had seen enough battlefield wounds to recognize death's approach. The third woman, harder-faced and cradling a Winchester like a lover, noticed too. We should have killed him in his sleep, sister, she said. Kiona speaks truth, as always. But Nayeli, the young healer, was already moving. Her fingers traced the air near Ayanna's wound without touching. Ancient knowledge passed down through generations who'd learned to heal in hiding. She needs medicine. Real medicine, Nayeli said. The bullet's still in there. Ezra felt the moment shift. Power was funny that way. It could change hands faster than a card-sharp's shuffle. I've got morphine, he said. Surgical tools from my army days. But you'll need to trust me enough to cut these ropes. Ayanna's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Trust? A white rancher who's probably been selling cattle to the army posts that hunt us? Maybe, Ezra said. Or maybe a man who's been alone so long he's forgotten why he should care about other people's wars. The truth was somewhere between those words. Ezra McKinnon had indeed forgotten many things during his 15 years of solitude. But he'd never forgotten the weight of dying in another man's arms. Never forgotten how quickly life could leak out through a hole no bigger than his thumb. Kiona pressed her rifle barrel against his temple. We could take what we need. You could. Ezra's voice stayed level. But your friend will be dead before you figure out which bottles are medicine and which are cattle remedies. Your choice. Nayeli's hands were shaking now. Not from fear, but from watching someone she loved slip away. In her desperation, she made the choice that would change everything. Cut him loose. Nayeli, no. Ayanna's voice was getting weaker. She's right, Ezra said, meeting Ayanna's fevered gaze. I could have let you be, stayed silent, and not told you what I have. She would have died. Why? Ayanna asked. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, thinking of his wife's grave marker, of his son's last letter from Pennsylvania, of all the wars that had taken pieces of him he'd never get back. Because I'm tired of burying people. The leather ropes fell away. They moved Ayanna to the kitchen table. Ezra's hands, steady despite 20 years of whiskey, laid out instruments that gleamed in the lamplight. Scalpel, forceps, needle, and thread. Nayeli will assist, Ayanna managed through gritted teeth. Kiona watches for soldiers. The young healer's buckskin dress clung to curves that spoke of womanhood barely reached, her long black hair catching copper highlights in the firelight. When she leaned close to examine the wound, Ezra caught the scent of sage and something wilder, something that belonged to the open desert under endless stars. "You know medicine," she said, not a question. "Battlefield surgery. Nothing fancy." Their hands brushed as he passed her a clean cloth. The contact lasted a heartbeat too long. Her skin was warm copper, smooth as river stones. When she looked up, their eyes met and held. Dangerous territory. Ezra had been alone long enough to recognize hunger when it stirred in his chest. But this was different. Not just the animal need he'd learned to ignore, but something that whispered of completion, of finding the missing piece in another person's soul. Wrong time, wrong woman, wrong world entirely. "Hold the light steady," he said, his voice rougher than intended. The bullet had lodged near Ayanna's collarbone. Not immediately fatal, but infection would be. Ezra worked carefully, aware of Nayeli's breathing beside him, aware of how she anticipated his needs before he voiced them. "You've done this before," he said as she handed him the forceps. "Apache women heal our warriors." Her voice was soft, musical. "Your people kill them." "Some of my people?" Ezra corrected. "Not all." The bullet came free with a wet sound. Ayanna grunted, but didn't cry out. "Tough as desert ironwood, this one." "Why do you live alone?" Nayeli asked as Ezra began stitching. "Lost my family to typhus. Son to the war." He paused, considering how much truth to share. "Some men aren't meant for company, and some women aren't meant for reservation life." Their eyes met again. This time, the hunger was mutual. Ezra could see it in the way her lips parted slightly, in how her pupils had dilated despite the bright lamplight. She was young enough to be his daughter, but there was nothing daughterly in the way she looked at him. "We should," he began. A rifle shot cracked across the desert, then another. Kiona burst through the door. "Soldiers, half a mile out, coming fast." Ayanna tried to sit up, blood seeping through the fresh bandages. "How many?" "Dozen, maybe more. They've got Apache scouts with them." Ezra's mind raced. A dozen cavalry meant this wasn't a routine patrol. They were hunting these women specifically, which meant someone had talked or someone had died badly enough to leave a trail. "There's a root cellar," he said, "under the floorboards near the stove. It'll hide 3 people. "What about you?" Nayeli asked. Ezra was already moving, clearing dishes from the table, wiping away bloodstains. "I'm a law-abiding cattle rancher who sleeps heavy and hears nothing." "They'll question you," Ayanna said. "Let them." Ezra met her warrior's gaze. "I've been lying to the army longer than you've been alive." The hoofbeats were getting closer. Nayeli's hand found his arm, her fingers pressing urgently against his weathered skin. "Why are you doing this for us?" Ezra looked down at her. This fierce young woman who carried the healing wisdom of a dying people, whose touch made him remember what it felt like to be fully alive. "Because," he said, "sometimes a man gets a chance to choose what kind of man he really is." Lieutenant Morrison had been Ezra's sergeant once, back when they were both young enough to believe wars could be won cleanly. "Ezra, you son of a bitch." Morrison swung down from his horse, 30 years of desert sun having carved deep lines around his eyes. "When's the last time you saw other human beings out here?" "About as long as I can stand 'em." Ezra replied, lighting his pipe with steady hands. Beneath the floorboards, 3 hearts beat like trapped birds. We're tracking Apache raiders. 3 women, armed and dangerous. Hit a supply wagon near Dragoon Springs 2 days ago. Ezra kept his expression neutral. 3 women? Don't let that fool you. These aren't reservation squaws making baskets. One of them put a Winchester round through Corporal Henderson's shoulder from 200 yards. That would be Kiona. Ezra filed the information away. Seen any tracks? Morrison continued. Fresh horse sign? Anything unusual? Nothing but cattle and rattlesnakes. Ezra drew on his pipe. What makes you think they came this way? Blood trail. Someone took a hit in that wagon raid. Apache medicine woman might seek out a white man's supplies if she was desperate enough. Morrison's eyes swept the ranch buildings, professional and thorough. 24 years of chasing ghosts through the Arizona desert had made him very good at reading signs others missed. Mind if we search the place? It wasn't really a question. Help yourself, Ezra said. Coffee's on the stove if you want some. While the soldiers ransacked his cabin, Ezra stood in his dooryard and remembered another choice he'd made once. Gettysburg, July 1863. A Confederate boy, barely 16, gut shot and crying for his mother. Ezra could have walked past, should have walked past. Instead, he'd knelt beside the enemy and held the boy's hand while he died. Some choices echo through a man's whole life. Found something! Ezra's blood chilled. A young private emerged from the cabin holding a strip of torn buckskin. It was stained with blood. Ayanna's blood. Morrison examined the fabric carefully. This is fresh. Apache work. No question. The moment stretched tight as a bowstring. Below, in the root cellar's darkness, 3 women waited for betrayal or salvation. Yeah, Ezra said finally. I took that off a dead coyote yesterday morning. Been using it to patch my saddle. Coyote? Manger-ridden thing wandered up to the water trough. Put it out of its misery. Ezra's voice carried the casual authority of a man stating simple facts. Figured the hide might be useful for something. Morrison studied his old sergeant's face, looking for tells. Finding none. Ezra, he said quietly, if you're hiding something from me. Tom. Ezra used Morrison's first name deliberately, calling up old bonds, old trust. If I had 3 Apache warriors in my cellar, would I be standing here jawing with you? I'd be in Mexico by now. Morrison laughed, despite himself. Fair point. They searched for another hour. Found nothing. As they prepared to leave, Morrison paused beside his horse. You ever get lonely out here, Ezra? Every day. There's a place for you at Fort Bowie. Hell, there's a place for you anywhere. You don't have to live like this. Ezra looked out across the desert that had become his entire world. Harsh beauty stretched to every horizon. Mountains like broken teeth. Sky vast enough to swallow a man's doubts whole. This is what I choose, he said. After the soldiers disappeared into it, heat shimmer and dust, Ezra stood listening to the silence that followed. Then he walked to the stove and lifted the loose floorboard. 3 faces looked up at him. Ayanna's eyes held something new. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Nayeli's expression was softer, warmer, touched with an emotion Ezra didn't dare name. Why? Ayanna asked as they climbed out. It was the second time she'd asked that question. This time, Ezra had an answer. Because some things are worth more than safety. Kiona, ever practical, was already checking her rifle. They'll be back. Not for a while, but you can't stay here. Ayanna nodded. We leave at sunset. Can you get us to the Mexican border? Ezra considered. It would mean abandoning everything he'd built, everything he'd chosen when he came to this place seeking solitude. It would mean stepping back into a world of choices and consequences and human connection. It would mean trading his carefully constructed isolation for something infinitely more dangerous. He looked at Nayeli, at the way firelight played across her features, at the gentle strength in her healer's hands. I know a way," he said. They rode out under a star-drunk sky, 4 shadows moving through moonlit sage toward a border that meant freedom for some, exile for others. Ezra led them along deer paths he'd learned during 15 years of solitude, routes that avoided the cavalry patrols and Apache scouts who served 2 masters. His spare horse carried supplies and water enough for a week's hard travel. At the Rio Grande, they would part ways forever. Ayanna rode despite her wound, proud as any war chief. Kiona scouted ahead, Winchester ready, trusting no shadow or sound. But it was Nayeli who rode beside Ezra, close enough that their legs brushed when the horses shied at night sounds. "Will you go back?" she asked as they paused to water the animals. "To what?" The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ezra's ranch, his cattle, his carefully ordered solitude, all of it seemed suddenly insubstantial as desert mirages. "There are Apache still free in the Sierra Madre," she said carefully. "People who remember the old ways, who would welcome a man who chose honor over comfort." Ezra looked at her in the starlight. 20 years old, beautiful as any woman he'd ever known, carrying the weight of a dying world on shoulders that should have known only joy. "And you?" he asked. "I go where my people need me." They both knew it wasn't an answer. It was an invitation. At the river, Ayanna clasped Ezra's hand, in the Apache way. "You're no longer our enemy," she said. "You are brother." Kiona nodded curtly, which from her was high praise, but Nayeli lingered as the others crossed into Mexico. She reached into her medicine bundle and withdrew a small leather pouch filled with desert sage and something rarer. Hope. "For when you're lonely," she said. Their kiss tasted of starlight and tomorrow's sorrow. When she pulled away, her eyes held promises neither could speak aloud. Ride north, Ezra McKinnon, or ride south, but ride toward something. He watched them disappear into the Mexican darkness. Then he turned his horse toward the Sierra Madre, toward a future he couldn't yet imagine, but could finally choose. Some men are born to solitude. Others learn that even the deepest loneliness can be healed by a single moment of perfect courage. What would you choose, safety or the unknown? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of love and redemption in the Untamed West.